Hi everyone, it's Marianne and welcome to my Wasteless Life. Today, let's talk about 2021's plant of the year, the birds of paradise. Thank you so much for joining me today, and if you're new, this is my Wasteless Life where I take you along my plant and sustainable lifestyle journey and share with you some of my tips and tricks along the way. And today we're going to talk about what I believe is 2021's plant of the year, the birds of paradise. I personally believe and predict that 2021's plant of the year, at least when it comes to statement floor plants, is going to be the birds of paradise. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One, as I watch a lot of the home trends for 2021, a lot of designers do say when it comes to houseplants as a style decor, the birds of paradise is going to be the go-to plant of the year. Previously, it was the fiddle fig and the monstera deliciosa, and while those two plants are still going to be staples in home styling and home decor, the fiddle fig, as we know by now, is not exactly beginners friendly and it doesn't always work in any type of space. And the monstera deliciosa, while it's an easier care plant compared to the fiddle fig, once it grows and it matures, you have to stick it up in a pole and it does become a little bit unruly and hard to manage as the plants get bigger. But when it comes to your birds of paradise, it's pretty much similar to your standard Dracaena or majestic palm floor plants when it comes to its care, but the birds of paradise gives more a wow factor as a statement floor plant due to its banana leaf-like foliage. And another reason is in the increase in both of the supply and demand of the birds of paradise. When I talk to local nurseries around me, the birds of paradise is one of their best-selling plants, and as you might have noticed, the birds of paradise is becoming a lot more available. Kind of like with the fiddle fig and monstera deliciosa when it first came out, the birds of paradise wasn't very accessible and it only came in that huge, large floor plant. But nowadays, you can easily and frequently find a birds of paradise, whether in your local nursery or in big box stores like Home Depot or Lowe's. And now the birds of paradise also comes in many different sizes, so you could pick the size of the birds of paradise that would fit your space. The birds of paradise is a tropical plant that originated in South Africa and is often mistaken for a banana tree or a palm. It comes in many different varieties, but the two most common one is the white bird of paradise and the orange bird of paradise. The orange bird of paradise is probably a lot more familiar to people, or at least its bloom, because it is the one that we often see, while the white birds of paradise is very difficult to get to bloom as indoor plants, and even if you put it outdoors. The orange birds of paradise also is more of a dwarf version of the birds of paradise, and it has a lot narrower and smaller leaves, while the white birds of paradise, or the Strelitzia nicolai, which is the one that I have right here behind me, is the one that has a banana leaf-like foliage and the one that you would want to get if you want a birds of paradise as your statement floor plant. The white birds of paradise as an indoor plant can grow from 3 feet up to 10 or 15 feet. So now that you know a little bit more about the birds of paradise and my reasons why I believe it's going to be 2021's plant of the year, I'm going to talk about how to shop for your birds of paradise, what to do with them once you bring them home, and what's the regular plant care for your birds of paradise. So keep on watching after this ad break. And like with any plant, you should pick the birds of paradise if it's right for your space, meaning you'll be able to provide the enough light it needs for it to grow. And a birds of paradise would need an indirect bright light in order to grow properly. And the birds of paradise do come as a large plant, but as mentioned earlier, now it comes in many different sizes. So don't be afraid to start with a much smaller plant if that's what fits your budget or that's what fits your current space. Because remember, plants grow, and the birds of paradise during the growing season is an exceptionally fast grower. And so even though you start with a smaller birds of paradise, like the one I have right here with me, it will grow pretty quick during the growing season and you will have a large birds of paradise in no time. When it comes to floor plants, I personally like to pick plants that's just a single plant in a pot as opposed to one that has multiple plants in a single pot. While it feels like you're getting a bonus or extra plants when you get a plant that has multiple plants in a single pot, for a statement plant like birds of paradise, it makes them grow a little bit slower, or the foliage grows a little bit smaller when there's multiple plants in a single pot. And if it's only a single plant, it has the opportunity to grow much larger foliage and mature a lot faster. And especially when you're shopping for a birds of paradise in a garden center, you'll probably find the foliage has a bit of a damage in it. but that is okay. Splits and a little bit of browning is fine for birds of paradise. What you really want to look out for is to make sure that the plant don't have any pests in it, especially if you're buying it during the winter time where spider mites are very rampant. So make sure you check not only on top of the foliage but underneath the foliage and also on the stems of the birds of paradise, especially in between where those pests could really hide. Also check the top of the soil and make sure you don't spot any insects or pests crawling on top of it. And despite any aesthetic or cosmetic imperfections that you might see on the birds of paradise, pick out a plant that has an incoming growth in it, because that is a good indication that the plant is not experiencing root rot currently and is in overall good health. And that's what you want to bring home a healthy plant, not just a beautiful plant. And as mentioned earlier, while the demand for the birds of paradise has increased, but also the supply, so don't pay too much for your birds of paradise. The prices could range from $15 to upwards of over $100 depending on the size. The birds of paradise that I got is around 3 feet, and I got that from Lowe's for $12.98, including tags is around $15. And in one of the local nurseries in my area, Plants Alive, they constantly have a supply of a birds of paradise. And for a plant that is slightly larger than this, it starts at $25, and they also have the large big statement plants from $50 to upwards of $100. And so you can definitely find a birds of paradise that fits your space and your budget. So what to do once you bring your birds of paradise home? Like with most houseplants, you would want to isolate your birds of paradise from the rest of your houseplants for at least 24 to 48 hours. But during winter time, and if you have limited space, that is almost quite impossible to do. So here's what you can do instead. The first thing you should do the moment you bring your plant home is to clean the foliage of your birds of paradise. You can either bring it into your bathroom, put it under the shower, or in your bathtub. Wash the foliage and also wash the stems, or just wipe down the foliage and the stems. I choose to just wipe it down instead of washing the entire plant, because I don't want to water the plant also the moment I bring it home. And usually when you buy plants from a garden center or a nursery, they just have been recently watered or just been watered that day. So I don't want to bring it home into a completely different environment and water it right away at the same time. The first thing I would do is to take a wet washcloth, just wet it with regular water, wipe down the foliage and wipe down the stems, and you will see a lot of dust accumulation on this foliage. So I'll do that maybe once or twice until I have taken out most of the dust. And next thing that I would do is spray the entire plant with a neem oil solution. You can either buy a neem oil spray or make your own. I prefer making my own, and I would generously spray the plant with neem oil, let it sit for a few minutes, and then wipe down the entire plant. And I'll probably do that once or twice and do it again for the next consecutive 2 or 3 days, just to make sure that the birds of paradise don't have any pests in it that might jump or spread to my other plants. When you bring home your birds of paradise, don't repot it right away. In fact, don't repot it at all. You can wait for 6 months up to a year before you repot your birds of paradise, unless the nursery pot it came with is broken or doesn't have enough drainage. That's the only time that I would repot, but even then I would still wait until the plant acclimates to my space before I do that. And right now the birds of paradise that I have is still in the nursery pot, and I just placed it in this decorative planter. Even though you're not repotting it, there's a couple things that you can do. One is to change out the topsoil of the birds of paradise, because usually that's where the fungus gnats would have laid its egg, and if there's any pest, it's usually going to be in the top inch or 2 of the soil. So you can change that out and replenish it with fresh soil and with added nutrients as well. I have had my birds of paradise for over 2 weeks now, and I haven't watered it since the day I've gotten it. And since it is the first time I am watering my birds of paradise, I would first do a hydrogen peroxide flush just to make sure that the soil is treated and don't have any bacterial or any fungus or any pest in it that might harm the plant. But when it comes to the regular watering of your birds of paradise, as with any large plant with large foliage, you'd want to water it a little bit more frequently than most of your houseplants. Like with my fiddle fig and my monstera deliciosa, I prefer for the soil to not be completely dry or to be dry for too long before I water it. Water your birds of paradise when the top 2 or 3 inches of the soil is dry. Do not wait for the soil to be completely dry or let it go dry for too long before you water it. But at the same time, you also don't want to be overwatering your birds of paradise. Signs of overwatering in your birds of paradise includes droopy leaves, brown edges that is followed by yellowing on the leaves, curling leaves, extreme leaf splitting, and also discoloration. And on the other end, signs of underwatering includes crispy tips, brittle edges, and shriveled leaves. When it comes to lighting, the birds of paradise love indirect bright light. It's best to put it in a south-facing window or supplement it with a grow light. During the growing season, you can bring it outside to encourage faster growth and maybe even get it to flower. But as mentioned earlier, the white birds of paradise is very difficult to get to flower. And also, if you're putting your birds of paradise outside, don't put it where it can get direct full sun. You want to put it in a slightly shady area, or at least in an area that doesn't get direct sun, because even though birds of paradise found natively in tropical regions do well under full sun, the birds of paradise that we get from garden centers and local nurseries were bred or grown inside greenhouses, and they haven't adapted to full sun like the birds of paradise that are grown in the wild. Clean the foliage of the birds of paradise regularly to help it absorb more light for photosynthesis. And when your birds of paradise is not getting enough light, it would have droopy leaves, leaf browning, yellowing leaves, extreme leaf splitting, and it will also have stunted growth. And if you notice, the signs of the lack of light is also the same for the signs of overwatering your plant, because the lack of light will prevent the absorption of the water a lot faster, which can then lead to root rot no matter how careful you are with your watering. And when it comes to fertilization, birds of paradise are heavy feeders due to their large foliage. So during the growing season, make sure you are fertilizing them at least once a month, maybe twice a month if you're using a liquid fertilizer. And if you're using a slow release granular fertilizer, fertilize your birds of paradise every 3 months or as the package instructs. And because they are heavy feeders, there's also risk of over fertilization, so make sure you are flushing your plants at least twice a year or when you see heavy buildup in the soil. And like with most houseplants, there's no need to fertilize your birds of paradise during the winter months or when it's in dormancy, because even if it's pushing out new growth, it is likely a lot slower compared to the growing season, and over fertilization can lead to stunted growth in your birds of paradise. And when picking out a fertilizer for your birds of paradise, you would want something with a higher nitrogen content because of its large foliage. But if you're also trying to get your birds of paradise to flower, you might alternately use a fertilizer that has a higher phosphorus content or add bone meal to the soil during the growing season. However, it takes at least a 5-year-old birds of paradise plant before it starts to bloom. In an ideal condition, it would bloom year-round, but the normal blooming period is from fall to spring. And as mentioned earlier, the white birds of paradise is very difficult to get to bloom as an indoor plant and even as a plant that is grown outdoors. And lastly, pest prevention when it comes to your birds of paradise. Since the birds of paradise is often compared to the majestic palm, I imagine its susceptibility to pests is also very similar. If you ever have a majestic palm, you will notice that come winter time, they quickly die out and they also get infested with a lot of pests, from spider mites to thrips to aphids and scales and whatnot. And I suspect the birds of paradise is also getting produced in the greenhouses the same way the majestic palms are. So they are not very resilient and they are not grown to withstand heavy pest infestation. So prevention is key. If you take one thing away from this video, clean the foliage of your birds of paradise, because in the process of cleaning it, not only you're allowing the plant to absorb more light, if you're using a neem oil solution to clean your foliage then you're also preventing it from getting infested with pests. And even if you don't have neem oil solution at hand, you can use soapy water to clean the leaves of your birds of paradise. And if you are just regularly watering your plant, you're not flushing it, I highly recommend bottom watering instead of top watering. And if you are top watering, make sure you are not pouring water on the stems of the birds of paradise, because water can accumulate in between those stems, which could lead to rot and could also be breeding grounds for pests. So that's how you properly take care of birds of paradise. Let me know if you recently got one or you're thinking of buying one down in the comments. And if you have owned a birds of paradise for quite a while, also share your tips and tricks down in the comment section. I would love to hear it, and I'll be sharing updates of my birds of paradise in my Instagram account, so make sure you're also following me there at My Oasis Life. And if you haven't yet, also be subscribed to my monthly newsletter, Plentiful newsletter. It comes out every first of the month, and I usually give a lot of plant updates in my exclusive videos in my newsletters. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're new here, I hope you subscribe. I come up with houseplants and sustainable lifestyle videos every week. And if you haven't yet, go check out these videos up here until my next one. But until then, I see you. I appreciate you. Take care of yourself and each other, and have a plentiful day. Bye!